The Liberal Democrat leader Tim Farron has taken his party's campaign bus to Scotland. He is out and about in East Dunbartonshire, where so far he's been talking about the Tory manifesto pledge to cut immigration. He called the announcement political manoeuvring, which means very little. Well, let's go to our correspondent Seema Kotecha, who is in Mulgai right now. Seema, over to you. Seema, hi.
Well, hello there. We're in East Dunbartonshire here with Tim Farron, the first stop he has made on his campaign bus. Thank you so much for joining us. Why are you starting here? Tell me the importance of this seat for your party.
Well, East Dunbartonshire is a seat we missed out on by just 2,000 votes here. Joe Swinson, the Liberal Democrat, just behind the SNP here. And this is one of many seats in Scotland where the Liberal Democrats are the only challengers to the SNP, and the only chance you've got if you want to prevent a divisive additional independence referendum that the SNP clearly want. But also across the country, across the whole of the United Kingdom, the Liberal Democrats now growing into that space that an official opposition really ought to be, providing an alternative to the Conservatives. Let's be honest, we're heading for a Tory landslide on the 8th of June. Britain deserves a strong opposition.
You talk about a Tory landslide and you talk about Margaret Thatcher getting a landslide in the 80s, but you had a picture of Margaret Thatcher in your bedroom, so double standards here, you're praising her and then criticising her.
I had a photograph of Michael Foot, David Steele, David Owen as well.
Why Margaret Thatcher?
Well, because she was one of the four party leaders at the time, and I had the other three also. I also had Morrissey, Che Guevara, Prefab Sprout and Gary Lineker, if you want full completeness, at that particular time in my life. But for what it's worth, you know, let's just imagine what Britain will be like, what Scotland will be like on the day after June the 8th if Theresa May gets the kind of landslide that Margaret Thatcher had back in the 1980s. What will that mean for you, your hospital, your school, your family, your children? What will it be like to be taken for granted? Now, I don't need to imagine what it will be like, because I remember what it was like growing up into a community in the north of England where the Conservatives did take us for granted. Half my mates' parents were out of work at any given time, mine as well. That is not what I want for my country, for my children. I'm determined to lead a country where our children see one another as all being decent to one another, and I fear a Tory landslide will be the opposite of that.
But let's be honest, a lot of people don't take the Liberal Democrats seriously. Talking to people, they say, well, hang on a minute, what are they going to achieve? What would you say to those people? How would you convince them to vote for a party that in the past hasn't necessarily always told the truth?
Well, you've got a party being very straightforward with you now. We're telling you what no one else will tell you, which is, of course, the Conservatives already have won this election with a landslide, so it means people can then choose the strongest opposition, and you don't frankly need to agree with me on everything to agree that Britain needs a strong opposition. And following last Thursday's election results, we know the only opposition party left standing across the United Kingdom with a 7% increase in our vote share is the Liberal Democrats.
You didn't do as well in the Somerset region as you might have hoped to in the local elections. Isn't that a bit of pessimism there on your party now, on their part, feeling a bit negative about the election and what actually might be achieved?
Well, I think what we saw from the local elections is a bit of a kind of crystal ball in what's going to happen on June the 8th, which is a Conservative landslide, Labour implosion and UKIP ceasing to exist because they don't need to anymore. Theresa May is now basically the leader of UKIP and the only opposition party across the United Kingdom left standing to increase our share of the vote by 7%, twice as much as the Tories increased their share of the vote, by the way, are the Liberal Democrats. This is a moment where Britain can choose an alternative, and the only ones with an alternative for Britain, standing up to the nationalists here in Scotland, are the Liberal Democrats.
OK, so the Tories today have said they want to cut net migration to the tens of thousands. What's your stance on it? I mean, you talk about good migration, don't you? What does that necessarily mean? Because when we're talking about the NHS, education resources being used on that part of the population, some might argue that, hang on a minute, we should be cutting numbers.
Well, Theresa May should learn lessons from her time as Home Secretary, where she consistently set false targets, like the one she's talking about today, and then went and broke them. And let's remember, immigration is a blessing to this country and not a curse. It's wrong to talk about migrant communities in such a dismissive and divisive way as the Conservatives, now they have effectively become UKIP, tend to do. But it's also really foolish. What you want is an immigration policy that is good for business, that is good for higher education, that's good for our health service. Don't set silly artificial targets that will damage British business. What we want is an immigration policy that is good for Britain, not good for ideological politicians.
OK, well, thank you. Tim Farron there, the leader of the Liberal Democrats. He will be moving to St Andrews a bit later this afternoon. So the party's starting in Scotland and then will be making their way down in the country later on.
Thank you very much, Seema.